Hello, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me well. If not, please type something in the chat box. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us on this Friday afternoon or morning or evening, depending on where you are and where you're listening from. My name is Malte Radke, and I'm part of the Lumix Festival team. I'm happy to see so many of you here on day 8 of the Lumix Festival for Young Visual Journalism. The festival, for reasons that we all know too well, is taking place this year as a 10 days online event, which is a first in the 12 years of its existence. For this year, we dedicated each of the 10 days to the exploration of a relevant topic in the realm of visual journalism and had some really interesting conversations so far. Today's program is focused, even if we still have to discuss it online, on the one analog medium that is still greeted with undiminished popularity, and even in this digital world, and that is the photo book. So we're very happy to have as our guest today for this live talk, the photographer and prolific photo book maker Laia Abril, who will be in conversation with Sophia Greif in just a minute. Just give me a second to introduce Sophia to you. Sophia Greif is a curator, writer, and researcher based in Hanover, Germany. From 2011 until 2013, she was a scholar of the program Museum Curators for Photography by the Alfred Krupp von Bohlen and Halbach Foundation, and has been working in different museums, including the Museum Folkwang in Essen and the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. From 2011 until 2018, she was one of the co-curators of the photobooks Festival for Contemporary Documentary Photography in Munich. Currently, Sophia is pursuing her PhD on alternative modes of storytelling in contemporary photojournalism. She published and co-edited several publications, most recently the book Image Context, Documentary Practices Between Journalism, Art, and Activism, which also contains a long-form interview between her and Laia Abril. So before I hand over to her, I'd like to encourage everyone to make use of the chat box for any questions you might have here in Zoom or on YouTube, where we also are live streaming. And we'll get back to any questions throughout the chat. So feel free to ask anything you want to know, and we'll sort it and get back to it later. So right now, I'm handing over to Sophia, and have fun.
Yeah, thank you for this nice introduction, Malte. Also from me, a very warm welcome to everyone in the audience. Thank you for attending. And of course, I'm very excited to welcome our guest today, Laia Abril.
Hi.
Thank you, Laia, for being on screen with us today. I am really looking forward to this conversation. Before we start, I would like to introduce you briefly. Laia Abril is a multidisciplinary artist working with photography and text, archival materials, video, and sound. She studied journalism in Barcelona and then attended photography courses at the ICP, the International Center of Photography in New York. In 2009, she enrolled in a 5-year artist residency at Fabrica, the Benetton Communication Research Center in Italy, founded by Oliviero Toscani. And there she worked as a creative editor and photographer at Colors magazine, which is a wonderful magazine that focuses on a single topic in each issue and follows it around the world. So I'm sure we'll come back to this later. In her personal work, Laia focuses on topics related to sexuality, eating disorders, and gender equality. And she is investigating topics that are intimate and uncomfortable, often relating to taboos and stigma. Research is an essential part of Laia's practice, and she is dividing her long-term projects into chapters in order to examine different aspects and facets, perspectives of a topic. Laia has published 5 books so far. Inspiration in 2012, Tediousphilia and the highly acclaimed the Epilogue in 2014. Lobis Molière, another one in 2016, and the also quite well-known On Abortion in 2017. So her work has been exhibited widely, and she has received numerous awards, including the Paris Photo Aperture Foundation Photobook of the Year Award, the Tim Hetherington Trust Visionary Award, the Magnum Foundation Grant, and she has also been shortlisted for Deutsche Börse Photography Prize last year, right, in 2019. So Laia and me decided that we will skip the presentation at the beginning and just start our conversation right away, because there's a lot we want to talk about. We want to talk about Laia's photo books and the genesis of her works, about influences and how she developed her methodology, about visual research, journalism, book design, exhibitions, and so on. And yeah, Laia will just share her screen and then we can talk along. And please feel free to interact and post your questions in the chat, and we will just get back to them later or whenever we feel like it's a good time. So welcome again, Laia.
Thank you.
I will just start with my first question. Right
Can
away.
I interrupt you just once?
Sure.
I was just 30 seconds before starting, I was in my email looking for it because I just forgot to ask you if you knew that I was at the Lumix Festival a few years ago. Do you know that?
No.
Okay, I just remember. I guess if I was finally in Hanover, I could remember better, but because we're in this weird situation. I think it was one of my first talks, and it was about a project that we won't be talking because it's a project I don't really talk much anymore. It was a multimedia piece, the first chapter of On Eating Disorders. Okay. And it was I think it was the first time that I was doing a presentation in English. So it's kind of nice, almost 10 years, I think, that it's been since then. So yeah.
Oh, wow, that's a long time. I think 10 years, that must have been like the first one, right? In 2000.
Maybe 8 to 9 years. I think it was 2011, 2012, something like that.
Okay, wow, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we would have loved to have you here today, but at least we have our screens. So.
At least.
Yeah, we want to talk about photo books today, and you've published quite a few. And all of them are often referred to as research-based photo books. Mm-hmm. So that is definitely a trend on the current photo book market, I would say. Like if we think about books like Mathieu Asselin's Monsanto or Ed Clark and Negative Publicity. So all these books are not only based on extensive and mostly long-term research, but they also make this research visible, like documents, found footage, archival materials are included. Mm. And I wonder, like, what do you think where this tendency is coming from? And why did you decide personally how you like to include all these materials?
I was trying to think about why, no, like as you say, but I think that's a complicated question. I mean, personally, I've never been that photographer that had this romantic story that the grandfather gave her a camera and she was like photographing since the beginning. But I was a researcher since I was born. Like, I think my grandmother told me that I wanted to be a private investigator, and in a way kind of like makes some sense. So like this kind of obsessive curiosity is in a way what took me to journalism. And that's very much the nature I have to understand things. So I think as you talk about colors, I think it was during colors time that I understood that methodology that they were already creating was pretty much the methodology that I would appropriate eventually, and somehow it would evolve. And I think it was a mix of many influences and situations. I remember one of the first photo book we were making, because I was also working as an art director, as an editor, a part of that team that was making other people's books. We were doing the Afronauts of Christina de Miller with Ramon Pez, who is the designer. And I remember she bought the Christian Patterson book, Red Hood, Pecker Hood. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the, I mean, even though it's not really that similar to the Afronauts or the Epilogue, obviously the way that, as you mentioned, his research become part of the work, it was definitely one of the first influences. I have a feeling that the moment you see someone doing it, it kind of makes possible. Like it's almost like they are granting you permission to do it, even if you already have it inside you. The same way that I was at the Tate looking at Taryn Simon's exhibition, and she actually framed in the artwork the research, like literally the sketchbooks, you know, like the small pieces of images. So I think it was a combination of where I come from colors, and a lot of people, the ones that you mentioned, obviously Edmund Clark, all these people that have been doing this practice that pretty much align not only with my personality, but also the kind of stories that I wanted to tell. They needed of that research. They needed of that kind of deepness. And I think that's one of the reasons that I got there. And I can imagine many people has a similar experience and got somehow in the same way. And obviously the most recent influences are also influencing the way we want to understand things. And research for me is a matter of finding reasons and answering questions. So I can imagine our generation, the next generation, is also looking forward for that.
Yeah. Also the topics that you focus on, they are hard to visualize with photography alone, right? So maybe you need more to tell the story.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, it's interesting that I am in this like festival of visual journalism, because in my path, even I do actually started as a journalist, not even like a photojournalist, like a writer in a way. My path has always been a little bit against it, a little bit against journalism and a little bit against photography, but it was not against the genre or the medium. It was more about the rules and the ideas and the expectations that a long generation of different gazes have decided how we should tell the stories, and especially which stories should we tell. So it's not that I woke up one day and I said, oh, I'm gonna decide to dedicate all my career to female issues, blah, blah, blah. It was not that way. It was more like, oh, why these stories that I feel very much connected to are never in the media? Why this that I believe is very much important is really like soft news or like a female magazine stories. And it was a matter of trying to break those kind of barriers and kind of forcing those walls that not only me, but in my generation, lots of us kind of got away a little bit of this street documentary photography, because the stories we wanted to tell, and especially the way we wanted to tell the stories, were not adapted yet. I say yet because I think it's changing to the platforms that, you know, they were like the speakers of the stories.
Yeah. I think when we talk about research and how you integrate the different materials in your book, it's interesting that you always do it, but the way you do it is quite diverse depending on the content and intention of the book. So yeah, you're starting to share your screen, because I think it would be interesting to, you're trying to, to look at some examples, and maybe we can start with the epilogue, because quite a few people might know it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's one of my most important work, because in a way, even if it's the third chapter of this first long-term project that I did on eating disorders, in a way, it was also the first kind of book or chapter in the rest of my career that would represent not only the kind of topics that I want to tell, but also the kind of deepness and kind of a slow journalism situation that I was part of it at that time. I was actually working as a photo editor at Colors. It was the last years, and I can't avoid to explain that obviously influenced the way that I work. In Colors, we have, you can imagine, like, not even the texts were credited. Like, you know, you have all the text in the magazine, but at the end, it's not written who wrote each text, because we have this very extreme idea of teamwork, this very extreme idea of who is the author of this piece, the one who pitched it, the one who researched it, the one who made the interview, the one who wrote it, the one who edited, the translated, the layout. So that idea of breaking a little bit the ownership or the authorship of the content, and also being completely free, because that was very much a Color situation, of using whatever it was in your hand in order to tell the story the best possible way. That was my methodology. That was my job day by day during 5 years. So when I have to create the epilogue, we have already done the Afronauts, I was working at colors, and I wanted to tell the story, which is very complicated, the story of a person who died because of bulimia after many years. And I was much used to tell those kind of stories, focusing very much in the person who suffered. But the person who suffered was not there anymore. And from my quite somehow traditional documentary tradition that I was coming from, how can you tell the story of someone who is not there anymore if you can't photograph her, if you can't talk to her? So the epilogue was the first time that I stepped back of this idea of very, very close to the subject in order to tell the story the best way possible, and actually getting a step back and trying to understand what happened. And by trying to understand what happened, what I did was to tell the story with 13 different voices, which were the voices of the family, their friends, the psychologists, and obviously with all the material that it was in my hand. As you can see in the screen, hundreds of letters of condolences, lots and lots and lots of medical research. They also have thousands of images of family albums. It was the first time that I understood the power of family album, which is something that is quite common nowadays. But I've never have occurred to me before, like to use images of another person, in this case of a family album. So it was a lot of things were like clicking, because it was also the first movement of post-photography times. And you know, the only obsession I had was to tell the story in the best possible way. So that was like the first goal. And this become a puzzle to tell Camille's story, who's the protagonist of the book.
I think it's interesting because there are a lot of like handwritten letters, and also the way the book is designed. Like you have these foldouts, but also facsimile, which make it more haptic or more personal. Maybe also you can touch it. You can get really close. Maybe that's one of the special things about a photo book, and really dive into that story. So I think here you can see quite well how you use the material to also personalize this, actually big story of eating disorders, and you just focus on this one person, and well, not her as a victim, but also the family as victims, and giving a voice to other people. So that's also maybe a way of collaborating, like you just mentioned how you did at Colors, you know?
Yeah, like the thing is, the way the project was created, it was not that I go there, I take some pictures, I come back and we make a book. When I was already there, I was already somehow designing the book. It was at the time that my design skills were really, really small, really low, really like simple, but I worked with designers all the time. So I knew that what I could do was to understand which are going to be the challenges. I knew it was going to be a complex story because it was a lot of material. So the hierarchy of information was going to be a challenge. I knew time was going to become something important. I knew it was a book and not a show. I knew it was a book and not something else, because I needed that kind of multi-layered scenario where I could add layers and layers of information, because the story is very complex. So design, production, research, text, which is obviously very important in my work, was only tools together with photography that when I was there in that house in the middle of nowhere in Chattanooga, going through 27 years of family albums and stories, I knew already that what I was using was not anymore because I liked that picture or because that was a good portrait, which obviously is also important, but it was more like, how can I visualize that kind of pain? How can I visualize that kind of absence? How can I tell that part of her story? So the story is already in my head, and what I have to do is to find a way to tell the story. So design is obviously, as you say, one important part. This is a very interesting example, I think, because Cami had 4 heart attacks, and she actually died of a heart attack. And the first one was when she was 20 years old. So I was very worried that if you're reading the book and you don't really pay attention to that moment, you're gonna miss a very important event. But how can you do that without being cheesy, without being, like a strange situation. So working with the designer in this way is like, I need people to stop when they arrive to this picture, to this page. How can we do that? So for instance, we create this sort of threefold, we call it threefolds, because it's a kind of a fold out that is really weak. It's hiding something, makes you stop. So all these design decisions, every decisions behind this book, it has a meaning. And I think that's part of our methodology, like playing this kind of ping pong game in which nothing is gratuitous. Everything has a reason.
And maybe you could evolve on this a little bit, because we mentioned that colors was very influential for your work. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also where you met Ramon Pes, the designer who I think designed all of your books, right?
Yeah, the first fanzine, The Inspiration, was both designed with him and another colleague from Colors, who is specialized in typeface. I think his Colors was a think tank, was a residency, was a creative center where not only Colors was made, it was called Fabrica, it was a residency center. And I met people from all over the world who were making films, were making product design, writing, music, everything you can imagine. So everybody who currently works with me, almost 99% of the people is people I met during those 5 years. And they understand really well this kind of philosophy, this kind of methodology, this kind of obsession for detail-oriented projects, and also from very different backgrounds. No, I have an amazing friend from filmmaker from Afghanistan, or my roommate was a writer from Uganda. Like I have, suddenly when you're like 23 years old, you have all this incredible influence. And Colors have a very, very long story. One of my favorite issues are the ones from Brumberg and Chanarin. Adam Brumberg and Oliver Chanarin were editors for I think 5 or 7 years. And definitely you go to see their first issues in 2002, 2004, you would see how the way they were photographing also influenced Rob Honstra and Said by himself and many other people. So my time at Colors was the last one. It was before it was gone. And obviously it's a different time because internet is already in our lives. If before Colors was incredible because they have researchers and stringers all over the world and they were taking stories from all over the world, now it was much easier. You only have to scroll Facebook and you would find these incredible stories that before it was very hard to arrive to them. So how can you mix deep research in 2014, 2012 with a new kind of product? So the idea was to create something much more connected to slow journalism. I'm not even sure we should call it journalism, but let's call it slow journalism. And this kind of deep understanding of the stories, again, using whatever you want, like illustration, stage photography, reconstruction, something that I do, especially now in my most recent projects, maybe not with the Epilogue, but you can see that in On Abortion, or you can see that in other projects. So in a way, Colors influence us, but we also influence Colors. Like the people at Colors, the director was Patrick Waterhouse, who made Ponte City with Mikhail Subotsky. And I can name many other photographers and people who pass by that place. And we influence it, they influence us, we influence each other. And only the fact that we use a lot of objects, that is something I've never been very comfortable with. And suddenly all my recent projects is only still life photography. It was a way to open our mind, because we were doing social topics. We were doing immigration, war, marriage, anything. But we were not actually following the rules of journalism or visual journalism or documentary photography. So that kind of mix was what make quite a special our experience there. And I believe also some of the latest issues and also are quite interested in that matter.
But how did you how did you turn away from journalism? Because you studied journalism before, and then you decided to work maybe more in an artistic field, if we want to call it that. So you decided to focus on photo books and exhibitions. And when you mentioned with Colors that it wasn't only journalistic, can you explain how? Like, is it just that you use other materials than photography, or is there still some kind of set of rules that you that you do?
In colors, it's hard to say for me because it's very different from time to time and I don't want to like generalize. But in my personal experience, the problem was what I've been told were news, were always topics that they were never connected to my reality. And I didn't understand why very important things in my reality were never making the news. Also, that kind of news that they were much connected to conflict and to some certain of politics, obviously to the male gaze, colonized gaze, and all these things that we are trying to break in the last years or in the last year, actually. I believe somehow establish a set of rules on how to document the other. And when I want the other that I wanted to document it, in a way for me was very hard to do it under those rules because there was a lot of nuance. It was a lot of psychology. It was a lot of invisible pain. It was a lot of, I have a lot of issues with the re-victimization of especially women suffering and how photographing them from a very paternalistic point of view, I didn't feel comfortable with. So it's not like one day, again, I woke up and I said, I'm gonna do this. It was more slowly, like I always make the same example, but for instance, on abortion, and we will get to the project deeper. Mm-hmm. But when I have to photograph this story, it was kind of the first time that I was reconstructing image. I've been appropriating photography and I've worked with post-photography and archive, and I was quite comfortable with that. But I've never reconstruct images because it's not in my nature. It's not the way that I was teach how to do things. And I think this picture was very interesting for me because this is a situation that happens in many countries, especially in Latin America. And I've been talking with women from El Salvador, from Nicaragua, from Brazil, who try to have abortions at home or in like clandestine clinics. And when that happened and there is some issues, some problems, they have to go to the hospital. So when they arrive to the hospital, the doctors kind of suspect, because you cannot even like be certain. So they suspect that they have tried to have an abortion in a country where it's illegal. And they call the police. And then the police comes and the police denounce them. And they handcuff them into bed, the hospital bed, sometimes for weeks, sometimes for months, often directly straight from jail to jail. So from my traditional documentary photography, in order to have access to this real situation, the kind of resources that I have to invest were impossible. I'm not saying it's impossible to get the picture. I'm saying the situation would have drained my resources, meaning money, meaning time, meaning many things. So I have to choose, do I tell this story or I don't, because I can't photograph the story. So I think it was one of the first images that I reconstruct on the project. And I always say that it's quite interesting how after, when I publish the pictures in some mainstream newspaper, they always select this image, which is one of the few actually that they are not like the real object or the real scene, because in On Abortion, I still was quite close to that. Now with the next project with On Rape, that kind of has evolved and I am less connected with that need. But I was very surprised how this kind of distance between reality and the audience kind of like make their imagination be more strong. And I don't call it fiction because all the stories are true, and I am very thoughtful in the process of fact checking and in the process of research, and the stories are true, but the images are not. And obviously that's something that documentary photography do not, I mean, at least not 10 years ago or 5 years ago. Now again, I think the way we visualize things is changing, and we are part of it. But for me, those are the reasons why I walk away, like not wanting to represent the stories I wanted to tell. And obviously I was born as a photographer in the year of the crisis in 2008. I graduated of journalism school, so I really empathize with your students graduating the year of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I know what is that. It's crazy. You go out and then the world ended. So yeah, I mean, in my way, in our case, it was economical, or not also pandemic, but obviously now it's also economical. And you take the most of the situation, which is being really creative and adapt to many situations. And I guess is what is their turn to do. I'm now getting nostalgic, sorry.
I mean, what's interesting about that picture, it works as a visual metaphor, and it's easy to understand. Maybe that's one reason why many magazines showed it. And maybe it's not that different from these kind of stereotypical images of, you know, a crying child that's showing how tragic something is in somewhere in some far off country. So yeah, it's interesting how there are similarities, however. But I think because in I think 2 of your books, in On Abortion and in Lobis Molière, you also have some kind of disclaimer in the imprint where you state how you work and that you use visual metaphors and interpretations. And I think that's quite interesting because when you look at the imprint, you know, that's how Laia works. That's how I maybe have to understand it. I know it's based on facts. It's not some kind of imagination, but you're maybe more free in the interpretation of the material and how you use it.
I think at that time, especially with On Abortion, it was the first time that I was doing a project that it has a lot of complex implications in terms of illegality. For instance, I was trying to show you an image of Magdalena. It was the first time that I was photographing someone, and by photographing someone, these people could be at risk. And that's something that really made me change the way that I consider showing that image later. So I'm very much concerned about where the show is going, who is going to be there, or, you know, even obviously with the book. And also going back to what you say about the way that we've been photographing people, it was very important to me that they were portrayed really strong. They are survivors of a situation. They are not victims because they have an abortion. They are victims of a system who is preventing them to have access. So they actually have their lives at risk, and they undergo through hell often, and they survive. So they are very, very strong women who are actually really proud of their own journey. So if I photograph them looking back on a window with a shadow from the back in a very paternalistic kind of like, you know, unbalanced point of view, I'm only re-victimizing someone who is not a victim. So it was very important for me, the way I portray them, the way the testimonies are included in the artwork. And in the book, which came later, it was a translation of what I've done in the first show, which is special because it was the first time that I was doing this kind of work for a space instead of for a book. The book and the magazine are not that different. The book, the first fanzine I published, Inspiration, I self-published it because there was no magazine who wanted to publish. And because no one wanted to publish, I'll self-publish it. But that was not only me, it was happening already. The platforms, the outcomes, it was harder to reach them because of the crisis in economical crisis and media crisis. So with On Abortion is interesting because I got really blocked with the book. I did the whole show in 9 months, which is insane, the whole content. And then it took me almost 2 years to make the book, which is very strange. And we talked about this, I think, in the interview. I have a very strange feeling that when I was trying to put together the content in the book, I was doing a catalog. And there is nothing wrong with a catalog, but I was very, very used to make books that there were really storytelling narrative tales. So if I have photographed the content for the book, I would have done it in a completely different way. Now I was translating a physical experience that I wanted you to have in this first case, in the first show, into a book. And I always say the same thing, but the book is a very private experience, and it's a conceptual one, and the show is a public experience, a shared experience. So I was actually counting with the fact that you were in a space in order to digest this really tough content. So I was really blocked about the book versus the show, especially with this first one. I'm also stuck with the second one. But I think what you say about the disclaimer, I also felt, I was 29 years old maybe, when I started the book a little bit later, I felt I was no one in order to write a book about abortion. Like, I was not a doctor, I was not a journalist anymore. I was not a sociologist. I was not a humanitarian. I was not an activist. Who I am in power, or what's my authority to write this book? To make the show, my authority or my role, I want to say, was to try to tell these stories who has never been visualized, these repercussions of not having access to abortion. There was not almost imaginarium around the clandestine abortion. But with the book, I got stuck. So I had to add some professional and authority voices in order to get more comfortable. And because I was coming from documentary photography, I was afraid people will confuse that some images were reconstructions. The thing is, for me, it's not important, because I know if you trust me as an author, as a photographer, as an artist, as a whatever you want to label me, you trust that I've done my work and I'm going to be ethical with it because you know me and my work. But it doesn't really matter the visual way for me that I transmit it to you, because I believe if you only go with this idea of showing evidences, it's really complicated to actually talk about these issues. So in a way, I realized eventually that I didn't want to document the stories. I wanted to transform the stories. So it's more about this alchemia moment, of something that you tell me and I visualize it, is somehow transforming it. And that's obviously not really journalistic. I'm not saying it might not be. For me, it is, but I understand it could be complicated to understand for others.
I mean, you once said somewhere that you wanted to visualize or show emotions based on facts. And I think maybe that's something that we see in the exhibition as well as in the book, that you just can't get away from it. You said that they are like, the images are also like visual triggers that make you want to know more.
Yeah, it's important that my relationship with text has evolved as well. When I studied journalism, they literally made me choose. They say you can't be both. You cannot be a writer and a photographer. And after, when I was at Colors, definitely not at Colors, but people outside, when I was a photo editor, people would tell me, oh, you cannot be a photo editor and a photographer, you have to choose. And now we have to research, produce, communicate, sell, ship our own platform. So obviously that has changed a lot. And I believe also the relationship between photography and text, thanks to photobooks, has been healed in a way, or it's in the process of healing. And I definitely, the books, the relationship between photography and book is something that it felt very comfortable for me to have in that kind of medium, because obviously when I ask you to read a lot in a show, it's really demanding. So my obsession with photo books, for instance, with the Epilogue or with Lovis Muller, is like we have this contract where you read everything from the beginning to the end. But when you're in a show, people are going to do whatever they want. I do whatever I want. People go inside, go outside. It's hot, it's art. I mean, probably they don't really care about abortion, but that's my target. My target is the people who really don't care or don't know or not really interested. I don't have to go to Argentina to talk to activists of abortion to tell them something they know much better than I do. So I want to talk to these people who, end up in the show by mistake, which is kind of like my target, which definitely is not the same target of the book, because someone who already paid 40 euros, which even if it's a good price, it's elitist. Not everybody have 14 euros to spend on a book. We already have a contract of interest, and it's a different kind of target possibly. So for instance, in the book, I think this series works better in a way. These are DIY methods women have been using since the beginning of time, that go like having sleeping in the snow, or having a very boiled hot bath, or taking very plants or poison, to the very iconic image of the coat hanger. And when you see the book, and definitely kudos to Ramon in this one, the creative direction is actually mine, because what we have to do was to translate the design from the wall to the book. So that part is definitely not the harder in this particular book for me. It's more other paths, but the production is really, really good. And that's obviously all Ramon's work. And for instance, this would not have worked if his production was that detail oriented, because when you open these pages, it's so well produced that you don't really see that there is an insert until you somehow move the page. And what is interesting of this series is that everybody has a bath or a coat hanger of seen plants or stones or whatever, but not everybody knows or imagines the way that they use it to provoke themselves abortion. So that kind of surprise element is what, for instance, sometimes things work better on a book or work better on a show, depending on the project. And that's the kind of discussion that I have with my designer. Like, I need this piece to get somehow the attention or some kind of emotion from the audience. And in this particular kind of books, it's really, 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 really delicate, because you can't do origami magic fireworks. We're talking about women dying because of illegal abortion. So it has to be a very, very small, thin balance of grabbing your attention, but being very elegant at the same time, because this is very respectful. So that's obviously something you have to work a lot with your designer in this case.
No, and I mean, that way you look at the image first, then you turn the page, read the text, and you look at the image differently, with a different, you've learned something about it in a way. Can we look at the exhibition installation views again?
Of course.
Because I think that's also interesting how you translate this experience of being in an exhibition where you also show objects. You have this installation with coat hangers. You have the chair from the gynecologist, and you also had sound. How do you translate that into the format of a book?
So when I first got the offer from Al to work, to show something, the project was not yet done. Actually, I always show this little example. I think it's here, sorry. I organize everything in a different way, and now I don't know where things are. I show this, this is a very, very tiny, 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 tiny example of the way I work. So for instance, I know that eventually I want to photograph that drone. I know that eventually I want to photograph that story. And I don't know yet if it's going to be a portrait. I don't know yet if it's going to be an object or whatever. So during the research is when I realized how I want to portray those things. And I was at literally this stage, not even earlier, when I got the offer to have the show. And we have to understand the context. This was pre-Me Too. I was under 30. It was my first solo show in this kind of scale. And it was about abortion. Like, no one wants to talk about abortion. And so this kind of very risk taker proposal from Sam, the former director, even though he gave me 9 months to do the whole thing, which is it's insane. Normally it doesn't work this way. You already have the images and then you design the show, or you just literally itinerate the show, but you don't really do the whole thing in a wider space. Since I've never done it before, I did the same thing. I did this project thinking the space was a book. So I have like the walls and I have the spaces. So I divided the space as if it was a book. And I did this kind of deep empathy process, which is imagine if I'm you as an audience, how are you going to feel in front of these pieces? In a book, it's easier because there is this, again, contract, no? Beginning, middle, end. But in the show, as this kind of freedom, it was much complicated. So in my mind, I did this very much colors thing, which is I'm going to use whatever is in my hand in order to grab your attention the longer time possible. So the moment you walk out from the room, something has changed. I'm not talking about your opinion, but the amount of information and emotion that I provoke in this scenario is hopefully going to change some kind of thing of view or experience. So when I have to do the book, all these strategies were thought for space. So when I have it to reconstruct them as a book, the strategies I use in order to create that kind of images, I have to give them a different meaning. And I realized I have it to let go. I have it to let go. It's not more a book from the beginning to the end. It's a research book. You go back when you want. I propose you an order. I just take the simplicity of the world to the pages, and I add some voices and I add some stories that I didn't have time or space to put on the show. And that's why I like to do the books after I've done few shows, because after I've done few shows, I'm starting to understand what I've done. I think it's only now after 5 years that I show this project 15 times that I'm starting to actually understand what I've done. But if you ask me about the new project, or you ask me in 2016 about this, obviously I was much more confused than I am right now. I just want to say that.
Yeah, but it's a process, no? It takes time and you really need to digest and think about it. And I mean, the book is maybe a little more like Colors again, the magazine where you follow one topic around the world and you have different stories, different experts, scientists, personal stories, rational contextualizations, and all these things coming together, and page by page, you understand more about the whole topic from different perspectives and countries.
It's funny you say that, because when I was doing the research for On Abortion, I asked help to a former Colors colleague. He was a writer, but especially he was a very, very good researcher. But he was busy, so he only helped me a little bit with some stories in Brazil. But when I show him the folders, I organize the folders very similar of the way that we would organize things at Colors. And when he saw, after 2 months, the amount of research that I have accumulated, he said, Laia, you have 2 issues of Colors here already. So he was like, what has you done? No? And it is pretty much that. And I was in a hurry. I was really nervous. I was really excited. I was really, really scared. So the way I researched for On Abortion, it was really like obsessive and accumulating hundreds of tons of information. The good side of On Abortion is that there are many kinds of research, and I don't do journalistic research, or I don't do academical research. I do artistic research, so I mix a lot of different kinds and sources, and I, at the end, decide what I want, so, which I guess makes you an artist in a way. And On Abortion didn't need much of, you could read about medical research, you could read philosophical research, but it was the main work was production research, which was finding characters, finding stories, finding people. You have to dig a lot to find things, because it was really hidden. And in that process, I would create images in my mind that I would produce eventually, as you say, in order to trigger you to read. But it's not like the images illustrate the text, or the text describe the images. It's just 2 tools that converse somehow. But now that has changed, no? The second chapter, it was kind of the other way around. I spent much time reading political and philosophical books and content. It was also a story that is also the other way around. There's a lot of stories. So which ones are the ones I need to tell what I want to tell? What's my approach? Why I'm doing this? There's a lot of people who've done it before me. What I am adding to the conversation? What photography could add to that conversation? We're not going to take the same picture of the same person doing the same thing if after 20 years hasn't changed anything. So how can we create something that somehow moves people in a different way, also understanding that we're in 2020. So all that's conversations with myself, and conversations that are all the time, that they modify the decisions behind and the strategies behind every choice and every aspect of creating the project.
Yeah. How important is the internet for your work? Because I suppose you're researching a lot online and finding your stories, but also maybe the way that you organize the material in your books is also kind of reminding me of the way that we perceive information or receive information nowadays in the internet. Like you read something here, then you have a link, you come somewhere else, you go back to it.
That's super interesting that you mentioned, because I'm not sure if I invented this or I read it somewhere. It could be both. But I remember the fact that when I was studying journalism, it was almost Facebook. I mean, I remember the day YouTube started. I remember someone telling me, there's this new website called YouTube. And I'm not that old, but it's just a lot happened, no? And I remember I have a class called Google. So they would tell us how to put like quotes. It was terrible. No one used actually internet to research. We were researching in hemerotecas, like libraries, things like that, no? But I am that generation that is exactly in the middle of digital photography, internet, but I didn't have a phone until I was 16, and I did never have a smartphone since I was 27. So I like to be in that situation because I believe and this is the thing I think I make up, I am from the link generation. Because when the first internet arrived, as you say, we were linking ideas. So you tell me something, there is a link, we think, and we connect things. Unfortunately, and I say with quotes, the new generations, I think they are the scroll generations. So information gets fed to you and you scroll and filter, which is a very passive way of researching. I do it all the time. I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it's how Facebook, Instagram, and things, even newspapers, right now it's just like a lot of information that you scroll and you react to it. But we didn't have that. We have to find these kind of links. Mm. And this kind of link way of thinking, I believe, is the way that we work with colors and I work, and I like to use to understand things. But the internet is like absolutely basic. Everything I've done in my life as a photographer, as an artist, is thanks to the internet. Like my first story, personal story, was about this lesbian community in Brooklyn, New York in 2009. And I guess we have a Nokia, but we didn't have internet, things like that. And I remember posting a post in Craigslist, which is kind of like this website for selling a cow, selling a sofa, or finding drugs. This is kind of the range of Craigslist had. And my English was terrible. So I would say, like, I'm looking for lesbians, which is obviously something you shouldn't say in that website. And then I went to a bar because it's the way that we used to do things. We would go to places and take pictures, and they recognized me from the post on Craigslist, which is kind of crazy because New York is massive. So everybody that I found to photograph or to talk to or to visualize, or the testimonies, it's always been online. And for me, it's obviously the best thing that could happen to me, because I can't go to Poland and ask women in the street if they have had an abortion. It's not like something it happens like this for me. No, I need sources and I need links, and I need researchers and fixers and people working with me all the time in order to find all over the world, because again, that's the way I'm working nowadays. In a very kind of global view.
Have you ever thought about doing a multimedia version or website of your work or one of your projects?
Actually, the talk I've mentioned at the beginning that I did at Lumix is because my multimedia was shortlisted for the multimedia contest, I believe. I didn't win. I think Christian, I don't remember who won, but it was a multimedia that I did about this girl who had bulimia. It's complicated because I'm more or less able to adapt what I'm doing in the world to the book. But if I have to adapt it to a digital platform, again, I have to start over. It's not that easy. We've seen it. It's not that easy to translate. So I believe it works when you already know that that's going to be the way. And I remember with the Epilogue, we got shortlisted to go to ILFA, this festival of, it's not multimedia, but it's like, how was the name? I forgot. Online documentaries before Netflix, I guess, like the way that kind of interactive docu photo website that we were doing. I don't think that exists anymore, but I have all the interviews from the Epilogue in video interviews. So I have hours of content. And I wanted to create something online because obviously one of the problem of photobooks is that you can't reach many people because the round prints are really short. And that kind of elitism or goes against my point, which is, try to talk to many people as much as I can, but also the mainstream platforms that could be YouTube or could be other. also are very complicated for me because they are very delicate subjects. So I need to, in a way, control the message. So it's all those aspects that make me see that online for me, I don't really like it because I can't control how people not react, but like the content, the people in the images are treated, or the comments. And so I'm always a little bit hesitating about that kind of content, but it could change. We will see. It's changing every day. So I like to try things, but for me it would be starting the project from the scratch.
No. And you would also need a new team again, like different
a team. I love when people think that maybe I have a lot of people working. I work alone like all the time. I pay people to do things, but they are not here with me. I wish I had a team. But you're right. You need resources, and resources is time, is money, is people. And obviously that also affects the way I work. Like the resources I have are very, very limited, and that has a good side that makes me creative often, but sometimes also prevents you to do things because you can't arrive to certain people or places or situations. So it's the same thing with photobooks. I would love having run prints of 40,000 copies, whatever it's normal in a regular book, but it's not the case. So multi-platform also is a way to achieve audiences. You have a show, you have, as I say, you have the book, you have this talk. For me, this talk is as important as having the show because it's part of the project. I mean, maybe we don't really talk much about the content of the project, but this kind of conversations are also part of it.
Yeah, because I mean I love photo books, but that's one sad aspect of photo books, that they reach the small community of photo book lovers, and are often collected, sold at very high prices. And then who do they reach? I mean, so I guess it's, like you said, it's important to have other outputs as well if you really want to put the topic across.
Yeah, it really depends. Like, for instance, with the Epilogue, it was my first book because the one before, it was a self-published fanzine, and it was very short run print. But when David Lewis, who is my publisher, my English publisher, accept the project, and we went ahead. This was 2013, and we did 1,500 copies, which is even more than what would you expect, because it was an average of 1,000. He could even have gone a little bit less. But I regret a little bit because we sold out in like 6 months. I mean, it was really fast. Maybe not 6 months, I'm exaggerating, but I did a small campaign on eating disorders in America. And the moment you do that, America is such a big country that the books disappear. I only had to target people who really like or were interested in the story, that were not only photo book lovers, as you mentioned. So with On Abortion, I didn't do it because my obsession was more connected to getting shows in countries where it was complicated, like in Ireland, in Mexico, and now in New York, in America. That was my main focus. But I had very nice surprises. Like, I was invited to this symposium in Canada at the McGill University, and it was the 30th anniversary of the criminalization of abortion in the country, and it was all doctors, panelists, nurses, medical staff and sociologists. And I was there with my book, and I was the last one. And some people already have the book. And I was so surprised, because we are talking about people who have nothing to do with photography, nothing to do with photo books. And it was really nice, because, okay, this actually has a meaning, no? It goes beyond. And I'm not saying it has to be always like that. It could be a very artistic, photographic, but I believe it's hard to find one photo book that does not have an audience outside the photo book audience. I believe if there is these people who have worked for a long time to achieve that, like Rob Honstra with his photo book events club. I remember being in the first one with the Epilogue, and I remember the last one I was there with On Abortion, and we went from like a room with 40 people to a scenario with, maybe, I don't know, lots of people. Mm-hmm. And that was really interesting, to see how that community he may grow up in Utrecht, which is, again, not New York. So it was really interesting. And I believe there is some space for people interested outside the photographic world in photobooks.
Yeah, absolutely. Laia, I would love to look at one more project, Lovis Moyer, and then maybe afterwards we can turn off or you can stop sharing the screen and we can answer some questions from the audience. So please feel free to ask some more questions. We'll come back to all of them later in maybe a few minutes. Because at the beginning we talked about materials of research and how you integrate and organize that material. And I think Lovis Moyer is also interesting because it's actually kind of a fictional reconstruction. It's about Spain's first serial killer who claimed to be a werewolf. So it's kind of real, but it's based on hearsay and superstition. And I think it's quite interesting how you work with image and text in this book.
Yeah, it's, first of all, I think you are the first person who says the name right in the whole history of this book, which is really interesting. No, because even the publisher who's going to kill me if he listens to it, he doesn't pronounce it well either. So I'm glad for that. Lovis Moyer was very interesting because sometimes, and I'm only saying this, which might be obvious for some, but I guess for the students a little bit less, when you get grants or you get opportunities of showing or making books or situations, it's actually tricky because you have to attach kind of like accept a calendar or an amount of resources with a schedule that sometimes it goes a little bit against what you want to do. And this was a particular situation like that because I have to do the whole show of On Abortion and the production of Lovis Moyer, both content and book, both at the same time, which is the craziest thing. I mean, I don't even explain it sometimes because people already think I'm crazy. So imagine if I actually explain it. But I think that was really interesting because Lovis Moyer is extremely different than On Abortion, but doing Lovis Moyer affect the way I did On Abortion. Because as you say, it's a fiction story, but it's not. Like, it's an actual story that happened, but there is a lot of folklore, there is a lot of magic, there is a lot of hearsay, there is a lot of tales that surround the story. And at the beginning, that was very complicated for me, because I was in this friction between I want reality, I want facts, but I will never actually know the facts. And it's interesting because this is written in the shape of a photo novel, and sometimes I do workshops on photo novels. I think photo novels are really interesting to understand also the power of text and image and how it affects narratives. And I believe because this was a photo novel, the way that I portrayed the women of On Abortion and this kind of photo novel in the world was influenced from one to another, and it kind of freed me a little bit of this reconstruction limitation that I put to myself. So I guess if I have to be critic with Lovis Moyer, if I was doing it now, I would have gone much wild. And because the story is pretty crazy, it's not only that he claimed he was a werewolf, it's also that few years ago, the forensic investigators have arrived to this conclusion that he probably was an intersexual person. So imagine the most serial killer, crazy, macho, famous story in Spain was actually an intersexual person. So I took the gender gaze, the gender concept, and to reconstruct a story that is being told many times, at least in the Spanish culture. And this is the image that you mentioned the other day, I think, because we got this award from the Festival Image in Bebey. And the book was supposed to be ready for the edition in September, and it wasn't because I did both On Abortion and this at the same time. But we did the show. And it was interesting because the show, the book was not yet finished. And the show, in a way, helped to finish the book. This idea of creating this kind of installation, red room, cave with sound, and this kind of 3 chapters that the book is divided. The book is a personal, subjective vision of the story. So it's like the killer sees the landscape from a killer vision, then he sees the landscape from a wolf vision, and then he sees the landscape from an intersexual person. So that was not yet very much clear in my mind, and I think it's interesting the fact that now when we show the show, we do it this way often. It depends, but lately it's being shown this way, where text is more present, where you understand more these layers. I don't really try to go in this kind of like very fantastic world, and it's a little bit more thoughtful. This is interesting, I think. These are when we applied to the award didn't exist, actually. I applied to the award to get money to create the content, but we didn't win. Actually, Christian Patterson won with a fantastic project, as he always does. But they invented this like book award, and they gave some money to the publisher to publish it, but we still have to create the content. So that was crazy because we have no resources, no time, and have to do these two projects. And we didn't apply with images because I haven't yet started the images. I applied with these three sketch or collages or presentations, which many of these illustrations are from Patrick Waterhouse, from Colors, people who I work with at that time. And it's not that different from what we end up doing, but this is pretty much also the way that sometimes we work, especially when doing books with Ramon. I talk about the conceptual research and the production research, and this would be more like the visual research. And in this particular book, there's a lot of it, because this book obviously opened a door to a little bit more of design and production kind of static and gay, and playing with it, which with other topics I did not play as much. But yeah, it was an interesting project. It's a little bit standing alone. It's not really inside of any long-term project, and I do sometimes use those to experiment things, and I think this was very important because it opened my mind through the concept of fiction versus reality.
Yeah, I think it's great to see this spread of your visual research, because then in the book you also have these photographs of landscapes, and they are like a stage on which the story unfolds, and the content or the story is told in the captions underneath. So the images are also, giving space for imagination, and you kind of a little bit follow that serial killer through the way that he went. And I think that's quite interesting. Also, what I think it's nice to see the installation view with this red color coding. And you also find that again in the book. And I think there's an interesting question from the chat maybe about this kind of color coding in your books, because one question it's referring to On Abortion, and Leah is asking, why are the portraits of the women in black and white?
Sorry, I missed the...
why are the portraits, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Why are the portraits of the women, like from the photo novels, why are they in black and white?
The idea of most of the project of On Abortion is in black and white. So basically the umbrella concept of history in the first chapter is in order to make a comparison between the present and the past. Mm-hmm. But that comparison is a game. I'm going to confuse you. Like, let me share the screen 1 second again. Like, I always talk about this image because it helps me to make the point. But when I first photographed the first objects that I photographed, which are these ones, I did it in a museum in Vienna. And the whole idea was having this museum aesthetic, and these are contraception and illegal abortion tools from the beginning of last century. I mean, it's a long range of historical tools. But when I saw this in the museum, I thought this was something also prehistoric, like something very old. And these are roots found in the uterus of a woman in Uganda in 2002, 2004 by the doctor I was working with. So this moment for me was this key moment of a history of misogyny, and this idea of confusing you when something belongs to the present or something belongs to the past was pretty much already said in this first series, and especially in this image. You're never going to fully understand when something belongs to the past or the present, So you have another reason to read, which is, as we said already, one of my main goals. So when I had to photograph the women on abortion, I decided to do it in black and white for few reasons. I think, let me go back to you. First of all, I was not able to control when I was going to, how I was going to photograph. I photographed in El Salvador, people from Chile, people from Peru, in Ireland, in Poland, in many countries. So often in very complicated situations, even like in jail or outside jail, or you know, like situations where I didn't have much time. And I thought at the beginning, black and white was an idea to make it more homogenic and to help me to be very much simple with the setup and how we're going to photograph them. But eventually I realized that since the images are really soft, the images are not really visually dramatic. The stories are, but I decided to not use images that they were really like strong visually in terms of content, because again, my obsession was having that conversation with that target that it was uncomfortable with the topic or against the topic, or, you know, like not really the main interest. So that was the strategy I decided to use. But the black and white, especially with flash in the photo novels, was the way I felt I could somehow transmit my emotions through this very, from the guts, no? Like they are very straightforward images. They are very evidence forensic situations. Like, she had abortion there, this is what happened. They are not really trying to be philosophical. Mostly of them are really evidence-wise. And the color was distracting me. The color was distracting me. The black and white was more root, and I need a little bit of rootness. It was gonna make more homogenic the whole series. And eventually, I felt makes sense also with this concept of confusion with time, no? with the present and the past. So it was not really a massive thought behind, but in a way it was a combination of different and on different. Also, often it's also very simple. Like, when I imagine you looking at the image, I have a feeling that color is more tender. I have a feeling that color could be more into the line of being empathic, like I've used for a long time with eating disorders. But here, I wanted them to be more root, more straightforward, more strong, more survivor. I didn't want you to feel kind to them, or they don't ask for that. I'm not asking you for that. So it was a combination of many, many aspects.
Mm-hmm. That also shows, you know, how these small decisions of color, paper, design in general are also part of the decision process of making a book, and so closely related to atmosphere and intention and the content.
Yeah, Lois Muller is a good example of that, because when we do books, especially books that are born as books, we think of them as an object, because at the end of the day, it's an object. It's not a series of your pictures in a white background. It is an actual object that has some weight, some texture, it's heavy, it's easy to open or not. And you can tell a lot by those elements. So every paper, every fold out, every color, everything that is a long decision, no? that we have in order to accomplish different goals. And sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, sometimes it's completely subjective. And I'm not saying we do it perfectly, but for me, it's enough if the conversation has taken place, especially when it's very complicated subjects or ethical decisions, especially with those images that I was mentioning, the ones that they are very uncomfortable, very comfortable. I do have a very strong opinions on how to portray the others, and maybe this is a little bit of like a complex place to have that conversation. But in a way, I always like to show this image. Every time I do the talk about on abortion, and I talk a lot about it. This image, it's for me. It's not to show anything to you, but it's for me to prove myself that a strategy that I have in my mind of having that kind of visual tone, it would allow for people who might not feel very comfortable in the room to feel that they could have that conversation. And this is an image from one of the first shows we did in Slovenia, which was a very tricky time. They have a election process, and the person who's going to be elected was very much against abortion. And they sent me this picture of this nun who spent apparently a long time reading the whole thing and even listening to some confession audio installations that I did. And I never met her, and I would kill to meet her. But for me, it's enough proof that the strategy and the decisions behind every choice, it makes sense, because this was my goal, having people there that felt comfortable enough to pay attention to the stories.
Mm-hmm. There's an interesting question in the chat related to this by Shireen. She's asking, did you receive feedback from people who ended up in your exhibition by mistake? Can they connect to your work? And she's saying she's a photojournalism student here at our school. She just won a prize. Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And she needed some time to understand and connect to your work. But she is wondering how people react who are not part of our industry. You
say collecting or connecting?
Connecting.
Connecting, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting question, because when I was doing when I was doing the eating disorder project, I was not doing much shows. It was mostly books or publications, and I would get hundreds and hundreds of emails every time we have a publication, especially in US, which obviously has a more big audience. I would get a lot of emails of many people talking to me about how the book influenced them, or very, very touchy stories. But when I was doing On Abortion, because at the beginning mostly were shows, the only way people would approach me, I don't know why, it was personally, physically in the shows. Mm-hmm. And I remember at the beginning a lot of people talking to me about their abortions, which was really strange. I'm glad for their sharing, but it was a very, very emotional situations. And I started to try to, and I should have done it better, and I always regret I didn't do it. I should have started to do more often those books where people write things, because these are such a complicated topics that not everybody feels comfortable really saying you things. But I started doing it after a few shows, and it's incredible. I was a little bit scared of people saying bad things, but mostly were very, very nice. And I'm not even scared for myself or for my ego. I was more scared of people criticizing the people in the pictures, and I'm really, less conscious about that. And I was really prepared for a lot of backlash, because I've done before a project on the homosexual community in northeast of Italy, and we got threats by neo-Nazis and the police. It was kind of a mess. So I was kind of ready for the situation, and it was quite okay. So it's been a very positive experience so far. I knock on wood. I think the next project is even, I thought it was going to be easier, but it's the other way around. I don't know if it's the world is getting worse or what's going on. But yeah, I guess I have my expectations were very high in terms of backlash, and it was quite positive reaction. So yeah, I guess it was positive. I try to not think too much about it, because since it's a very itchy project, you should expect that a lot of people doesn't like it, but obviously it's hard sometimes to get those.
Yeah, but I mean, it's an important starting point for a discussion about important topics, and so
yeah, also because there's a misconception about art or culture or photography, about people having, and I already make the mistake, like it. I'm not looking for you to like it. And that's not the goal. I mean, if you like it, it's great, but it's not exactly, and it's not at all what I'm looking for. It's just like people sometimes confuse, myself included, the feelings that something provokes you with an attack or having to like it. And it's very, but honestly, I have very interesting conversations, even again, maybe not with the nun, but with people who were friends of myself who were Catholics. Even when we managed to have the show, this was incredible. We managed to have the show during the referendum in Ireland. Mm-hmm. It took me 3 years to get the show in Ireland. And the moment I got it, it was the month of the referendum. So it was kind of meant to happen. And I remember being in the opening and these very young women coming to me and saying, oh, this is great because I haven't yet made my mind. And I was really shocked because the law in Ireland was really draconian. It's not slightly, it was like women were dying. And I was really surprised of these young artists or creatives or photographers, community, really having these very conservative views. And I was really glad that they felt that the show helped them. So I was like, okay, but it also scared me because I was like, okay, we don't really understand that sometimes what we think is the world it's not really what's going on. No? And I think that's also part of having shows and being able to talk to people is understanding the way they see things. Is not, I mean, starting from my white privilege as a woman in Europe, no, like having to understand also where you bring the show or when you bring the book and the impact that it's going to have, it's also a very interesting process.
Mm-hmm. You just maybe like one final question, because I'm afraid we're running out of time. But at the beginning of this year, you just showed your newest project on rape in an exhibition in Paris. Mm-hmm. And you also kind of hinted that you're going to publish this as a book as well. Can you tell us like a few words about this? Like, where are you in your process right now?
Yeah, so we have the show in January now, in Paris in my gallery, and it went really well. And the idea was to recreate the same process. So to have few shows and then me doing the book later, because I need again to understand what I've done. But then we couldn't make the shows because they all got postponed because of the situation. We hopefully gonna get few in fall, in Liège, in Belgium, and in Foam in Amsterdam, but it could get postponed because of the situation. So since this year doesn't count, I'm also taking my time because I do need that understanding in a physical space. And I've been researching a little bit, I've been reading, I'm also preparing the next project. So I think I'm closer to that second lecture that the book needs, that is different than the show, that kind of target that I might have in the book that is not the same as the one in the show. And it's somehow evolving, and I'm trying to also get the future research affect a little bit this book. It's very interesting when you are doing many projects at the same time, even if some is only talking about them and some is only proposing to grants and some are actually producing. And as we say with Love is Muy around abortion, to see how the new you already sees obsolete the you of 2 months ago, and then you have to do something based on what you did 2 months ago, and you already are in a different point, no? But that's what I think, and I like to see photographers and artists work from a perspective of the biography and the whole career. No? I'm reading Marina Abramovich's biography, which is more mainstream, but it's really interesting to understand her life, and you don't really analyze or criticize. And again, with photography, it's the same, like the most recent project or that series that they did there or that book. I think it makes more sense to see the author as a whole, because you can't be always doing the best book of your life every time, because it's impossible and you get very tired of that pressure. And also you need to make those projects in the middle that they are not amazing in order to understand things. So I think we should be less exigent with ourselves and with other people, and understand is a process. So I am being gentle to myself and in the process of making the new book. I guess that at the beginning of the next year, at the end of the year, it's gonna really depend on many things that they are not even in my hand. But also it's the toughest subject that I've ever done, and it's really draining, and I take it slow because it's really, every time that I have to go through it, it's a lot. So I also trying to take that slowly in consideration.
Mm. Well, we're looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Laia, for your time and sharing your thoughts and insights and your work. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks to the audience for being with us today and for asking questions. If you want to find out more about Laia's work, please visit her website. I'm going to post it in the chat in a minute. It's just laiaabril.com. Easy. And as Malte mentioned before, the both of us did a longer interview for and the book Image Context, which will be published quite soon. I think we're going to print it next week.
Nice.
So yeah, you can stay updated on our website, image/matters/ discourse. I posted in the chat. So thank you so much. Take care, stay healthy, and I'll give back to Malte. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Thanks, Laia. Thanks, Sophia. It's been a great talk, and I feel like this could go on for hours, but we're a bit limited in time. But thank you very much again. And thanks everybody in the audience who tuned in today. A big thank you to the 7 Photo Agency, who provided us with their Zoom framework to make this series of talks possible. The 7 Agency is giving away a discount code for their new interactive online events, which I'll post into the chat in a second. We will continue tomorrow with another day of program. And tomorrow we will focus on one of the most pressing issues, not only in visual journalism. Today's topic is equality, and the topic comes with a question mark and will address the inequalities within the industry of photojournalism and visual journalism, and ask whose pictures we do see and whose voices we do hear. And among many other events, there will be a video interview with Charlotte Schmitz with women photographers from all over the world, which will be available on IGTV, and a live talk at 4 p.m. with Sanne de Wilde. So thank you again, everybody, and see you tomorrow. Bye.